I noticed the missing wave before I noticed the silence. For a year, my neighbor had stood in her upstairs window every morning and waved at the exact same time. Then one day she didn't, and I went to check on her. My name is Daniel Cross. My name is Daniel Cross. I'm 36, and I work in building maintenance for a small apartment complex on the east side of the city, which means I spend most of my day fixing things people only think about when they stop working. Leaky taps, jammed locks, broken hallway lights, a boiler that sounds like it's planning a rebellion. I live in the ground floor unit with a view of the parking lot and a kitchen that always smells faintly like coffee and dust. My neighbor was Lena. She lived in the unit above mine, in the apartment with the narrow balcony and the window facing the courtyard. She was the kind of woman people noticed without meaning to. Not because she tried to be noticed. Because she carried herself like someone who had learned how to keep going, even when the day didn't deserve her effort. She had a habit of wearing oversized sweaters, reading glasses tucked into the collar when she wasn't using them, and a blue ceramic mug she carried like it had some private significance. Every morning, without fail, she'd appear at her window around 7:10, raise her hand and wave. Not a dramatic wave, just a small one, like she was making sure the world was still there. We met because the building's front gate stuck in winter, and she held it open for me while I wrestled a cart full of replacement parts through the gap. She laughed when I muttered at the metal frame like it was personally insulting me. I told her she shouldn't stand outside in the cold. She said, "Then fix the gate faster." That was the beginning of it. The day she didn't wave, the morning she didn't wave, the sky was low and gray, and the courtyard was still wet from a light rain that had fallen before dawn. The air smelled like damp concrete and old leaves. Somewhere upstairs, a radiator knocked softly in the wall. I stepped outside with my keys in one hand and looked up by habit. Her window was open. The curtain moved. But Lena wasn't there. For a full minute I thought I had simply missed her, that she'd waved earlier, that I was being ridiculous. Then I caught myself looking again. Nothing, no hand at the glass, no small lifted fingers, no blue mug, no shadow of her leaning into the frame. I stood there longer than I meant to. By the time I went inside, I already knew I was going to check on her. The year of the wave, there's a strange comfort in routine when you live alone. You start to know the sound of your own keys on the counter. The exact point in the morning when the coffee turns from necessary to functional. The angle of light in the hallway when you leave for work. Lena's wave had become part of that rhythm without either of us naming it. It started almost accidentally. One morning I looked up while carrying a toolbox to the van and saw her at the window. She gave a quick wave, almost absent-minded. I raised a hand back. The next morning, she did it again. Then I did. By the third week, it had become a thing we both pretended was normal. Some days she waved with the blue mug in her other hand. Some days, she looked half awake. Once, in the rain, she gave me a particularly lazy wave from behind the glass, hair damp around her face, and I caught myself smiling like an idiot. We never spoke about it. That was part of what made it work. It was small enough to be safe. And yet it meant more than it should have. I noticed patterns because that's what maintenance men do. She waved more slowly when it was cold, faster when she was late. Sometimes she paused before waving, as if deciding whether I looked like someone worth acknowledging that day. That should have annoyed me. It didn't. Instead, it made me look forward to mornings in a way I hadn't expected. Checking on her, I crossed the courtyard and went up the stairs 2 at a time, trying not to make the decision feel bigger than it was. The stairwell smelled faintly of bleach and rain-soaked shoes. Someone had left a bicycle leaning crookedly near the landing, Lena's door was closed. No sound from inside. I knocked once. Then again, louder. Nothing. I knocked a third time and called her name. Still nothing. For a second I just stood there, one hand on the doorframe, listening to the thin silence behind it. That kind of silence has a shape. You learn that if you've spent enough time fixing buildings that creak in the wrong places. I tried the handle. Locked, I was about to decide whether to get the building supervisor involved when I heard a faint sound from inside. Not a voice, a dull thud. Then something light falling over. My stomach tightened. I knocked harder. "Lena?" A beat. Then, very faintly, "I'm here." That was enough to turn worry into action. The first crack, she opened the door after a long minute, and I immediately saw that something was wrong. Her hair was loose and messy, falling across one side of her face. She wore one of those oversized sweaters I had seen before, but it hung off her too much now, like she'd lost weight recently. Her blue mug was on the table behind her, tipped on its side beside a scatter of tissues. Her eyes looked tired in the deep, exhausted way that no amount of sleep fixes overnight, and she was holding herself too still. "Hey," I said carefully. She tried to smile. It didn't quite work. "You look concerned," she said. "You disappeared. I missed a wave. A wave that you've done every day for a year." Her mouth twitched, but the expression collapsed fast. That was the first crack. Not dramatic. Just enough. I stepped inside before she could tell me not to. The apartment smelled like tea, old paper, and something medicinal I couldn't place. One lamp was on in the corner, casting a warm pool of light over the sofa. The curtains were half open. The blue mug sat on the table like it had been abandoned mid-thought. Lena noticed me looking at it. "That's not interesting," she said. "It is if it's out of place." She gave me a sideways glance. "Of course that's what you notice." I almost smiled. Almost then I saw the faint redness around her eyes, and the smile left immediately. What she was hiding, she moved past me too quickly and sat on the edge of the sofa, shoulders tucked in as if she could shrink smaller than the room. I stayed standing for a second, because sitting down felt too intimate and not sitting down felt rude. "Did something happen?" I asked. No, that answer came too fast. I looked at her. She looked away. The blue mug was still on its side. A small tea stain was drying into the wood beneath it. "Lena," I said. That was the kind of no that means yes. She let out a breath that was almost a laugh, but not quite. "You're very annoying when you're right. That's one of my worst habits." She rubbed a hand over her face, then let it drop into her lap. For a moment she seemed to be deciding whether to tell me anything at all. Then she said, "My mother's in the hospital." The room went quiet. I didn't speak right away. "Is she okay?" I asked finally. She shook her head once. "No one knows yet." That sentence landed like a weight. I took the chair opposite the sofa, more slowly this time. Lena looked at me, then down at her hands. "I didn't want to make it a thing," she said. "It already is a thing." Her mouth tightened. "I know." There was a long pause after that, the kind that happens when someone is trying very hard not to fall apart in front of another person. The part I hadn't seen Lena had always been the one who waved first. That was what made her absence feel so sharp. Now I understood that maybe the wave had never just been a greeting. Maybe it was a proof of life. Maybe it was her way of saying the day had started and she was still in it. I sat there watching her stare at the floor, and I realized how little I actually knew about the weight she carried. She had always seemed steady, not cheerful exactly, just composed, like someone who had figured out how to keep the important parts hidden. It made sense now. People who are good at appearing fine usually have practice. Did you call anyone? I asked. She nodded once. Your family? She looked up, and there was a flash of something in her face that made my chest go tight. I don't have much family, she said quietly. That was all she said, but it told me enough. I felt suddenly very aware of the room around us. The low hum of the refrigerator, the radiator ticking in the wall, the rain returning softly against the window. Ordinary sounds, normal sounds. The kind of background noise that keeps happening whether your life is falling apart or not. I asked, "Do you want me to stay?" She looked surprised by the question. Then she looked away again, and this time when she spoke, her voice was smaller. I don't know. That was the honest answer. I nodded once. Then I'll sit here until you do. The exit door, she let out a breath through her nose, and I could see her trying not to react to the fact that I had said that without making it a grand gesture. That was important. I knew better than to turn kindness into pressure. So I stayed quiet. After a while she said, "You don't have to do that. I know. You could go back downstairs. I could." She glanced at me, suspicious now, as if she knew the refusal was coming. I gave it to her anyway, but I'm not going to. That brought the smallest, most tired smile to her face. It vanished quickly, but it was there. Then she leaned back against the sofa and closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them, she said, "You know what's ridiculous?" I shook my head. I was embarrassed that you saw I didn't wave. That hit me harder than I expected. I looked at her for a moment, trying to understand how something so small had become something she worried about in the middle of all this. "Lena," I said quietly, "I came up here because you didn't wave. I wasn't judging you for it." Her eyes stayed on mine. "I know," she said, but she sounded like she was trying to believe it. The first honest thing, she reached for the blue mug and held it in both hands like it anchored her. "I didn't want you to see me like this," she said after a while. "Like what?" "Not waving." That almost undid me. I leaned forward a little. "You do realize that not waving for one day does not erase the whole year before it." Her fingers tightened around the mug. "I know. What you're actually saying," I told her, "is that you didn't want to need help." That made her look up, and there it was. The truth. Not dramatic, not loud, just there, plain on her face. She took a breath that seemed to hurt. "My mother has always been the one who made everything smaller," she said. "Bad news, bills, problems. I'm used to being the one who doesn't make things harder for anyone else." There it was again. The shape of a person who had spent too long being dependable. I said, "You don't have to do that with me." Her eyes filled, but she didn't let the tears fall yet. "You say that like it's easy. It isn't." She looked at me then, and the expression on her face was so vulnerable, it made me want to stand up and fix every broken thing in the world just to earn the right to stay. I didn't say that. I said, "It's only hard if you think asking makes you a burden." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she whispered, "Doesn't it?" That question hurt, because it sounded like it came from somewhere old. Somewhere practiced. I shook my head once. "No." She laughed under her breath, but it turned into a shaky exhale before it could become anything else. The wave I got up and crossed to the kitchen table, mostly because sitting there looking at her while she tried not to break felt like a violation of some unspoken rule. The blue mug sat beside a folded card from the hospital with her mother's room number on it. On the inside of the card, in her neat handwriting, was a word I could barely see at first. "Please," that was it. Not a sentence, not an explanation, just the word. It took me a second to understand that she had probably written it to herself. A reminder. a private plea. Maybe to keep going. Maybe to stay calm. Maybe to ask for help if she had to. I turned back to her. "Were you going to go in tonight?" I asked. She nodded. "Alone?" Another nod. I let out a slow breath. "That's not a good plan." She gave me a look that was half grief, half exhausted amusement. "Your plan seems to be staying in my apartment until I surrender." "It's a strong plan." That got a real smile from her this time. Small, brief, but real. Then she said, very softly, "You could come with me." I didn't answer too fast. I wanted her to know I heard the weight in the offer. So I said, "Only if you want me there." She looked at me for a long second. Then she nodded once. That was the first time I understood the wave had never really been the point. It had been a way of keeping the door open. At the hospital smelled like sanitizer and old coffee, and the lights were too bright for the hour. Lena walked beside me with her shoulders slightly hunched, one hand still around the blue mug she had finally decided to bring with her. She seemed smaller there, not weak, just more human. We stopped outside the room before going in. She took a breath. Then, another. I waited. When she looked at me, I saw the fear she'd been hiding all day. So I said, "You don't have to do this alone." Her mouth trembled once. Then she nodded. And we went in together. Afterward, her mother was going to be okay, though recovery would take time. That was the sentence the doctor gave us when we finally came out of the room and stood in the hallway, both of us too tired to feel the full shape of relief yet. Lena leaned back against the wall and closed her eyes. I stood beside her without speaking. After a while she said, "You really came because I didn't wave." "Yes, that sounds insane. It was your system." She gave a wet laugh this time. Then she turned her head toward me and said, "I thought you'd think I was being childish." I looked at her. "I think you were scared." Her throat moved. "That's not the same thing." "No," I said. "It isn't." She stared at me for a moment, then looked away. The hallway was quiet except for distant wheels rolling on tile and the muffled sound of a TV somewhere down the corridor. She let the silence sit between us for a while. Then, without looking at me, she said, "Thank you for checking." That sentence did something small but permanent to the air. I answered, "Always." 3 weeks later, she was back at the window. Same sweater, same blue mug, same 7:10 timing. When I looked up, she raised her hand and waved. Not big, just the same small wave as before. I lifted mine back. The difference was that now she held the wave a second longer than usual, and for the first time, I understood it not as routine, as trust. Months later, we started taking coffee on the shared stair landing in the mornings. She told me more about her mother, and I told her more about the building, though she was mostly interested in which tenants were the loudest and which hallway light had the personality of a dying moth. She still waved, every day, but now she also came downstairs sometimes without any reason at all. That was new. That was better. Years later, when people asked how we got together, we told them it started with a wave. That wasn't the whole truth. It started with the day the wave didn't come, and one of us finally decided not to pretend that missing something small didn't matter. What would you have done if your neighbor stopped waving after a year of doing it every day? And have you ever realized that the smallest routines sometimes hide the biggest reasons to care? Tell me your story in the comments. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.